Hello and welcome to the Matchbook Champions League podcast. I'm Phil Kitramilides. It's the last show of the season because there are just two teams left in the competition. Both Liverpool and Spurs made it through to the final in the most dramatic of circumstances. And Saturday night's game at the Estadio Wanda Metropolitano here in Madrid could be another epic contest. Joining me to look ahead to the final on today's show, we've got an all-star cast. Paolo Bandini, European football writer, joins me, along with Ian Broderick from Betting Emporium and Mark O'Haire from We Love Betting. Paolo, sometimes if you get a European final with two sides from the same country, the same division, it might diminish the excitement a little bit for this final. I don't think that's the case for this final, is it? Obviously, regular listeners to the podcast know that I'm a Spurs fan. I live in Madrid, so this is probably the biggest game ever for me. But I think everyone else is quite excited about this game as well, right?
Yeah, I think you're right, Phil. And I think the biggest part of that is just the journeys the two teams have taken to get to this final. And both such extraordinary journeys and also such extraordinary parallels, I think, all the way through it. Both teams barely getting through their groups, both of them needing results in the final game to just pip an Italian team by coincidence on both occasions. Both teams going up against two of the heavyweights of German football in the first knockout round and recording really some impressive wins in different ways against Dortmund for Tottenham and Bayern Munich for Liverpool. And then both of them needing absolutely extraordinary comebacks in the semi-finals. I mean, two of the most improbable just incredible semi-finals that we've ever witnessed in the Champions League, happening on back-to-back nights. I think that Tottenham and you think of individual moments, that the Lucas Moura goal in the 95th minute, Liverpool and Trent Alexander-Arnold with that corner that just completely flummoxed Barcelona. I think there's just such a sense of destiny almost to both of these teams, the way they've got here, that it becomes compelling for that, as well as the fact that they're two great footballing teams.
You mentioned the word destiny. Brodders has been saying for a while that Spurs' name is on the cup, and it's not because that you want Spurs to win, Brodders, is it? But you think there's some reason, something in the air, that it's Spurs' year for some reason.
Yeah, as you say, it's the last thing I want is for Spurs. Just with you, but actually, it's quite close between Spurs and Liverpool, who I least want to win it. But yeah, I think if you look at their results and how games have gone from the group stages through the knockout stages, as Paolo's touched on, there's an extraordinary level of I don't want to say luck because that's unfair, but they've had an awful lot of late goals and late incidents go in their favour. I was having a quick look, and I knocked out some points on it. And like, if you look at they after 3 games in the group stages, they had 1 point, and Inter had 6. And then against PSV in their fourth group game, they were 1-0 down at home with 12 minutes to go. And then Harry Kane scored twice in those last 12 minutes with an 89th minute winner. Against Inter in their next game, they scored the winner in the 80th minute. And then, of course, in the last group game, when they were able to play Barcelona away, when Barcelona didn't have to get anything, so there was no Suarez and Messi only played for the last 30 minutes. They scored an 85th minute equaliser in that game through Moura again. In Italy, at the same time, Inter, who just needed to beat PSV to qualify, in the 94th minute, that well-known PSV defender Vergeva did a wonderful tackle on Icardi from a Spurs point of view when Icardi was 8 yards out and free on goal. And then Lautaro missed a free header from the 6-yard box in the next attack. And then, of course, you had the amazing scenes against Manchester City when Guardiola played that weird side in the first leg. And then in the second leg, Man City are going through, their 4-2 up. Llorente fists one into the goal and extraordinarily gets given it through VAR, and then Sterling has that last-minute goal ruled out for offside. And then you get to the Ajax game, and then you have, this extraordinary situation where they're 3 down on aggregate with 35 minutes to go, and Moura comes up with this most extraordinary hat trick and that 95th minute winner or winner on aggregate. So, yeah. I think as a Chelsea fan, I think I can recognise that sometimes the best club doesn't always win it. And I think all the metrics, as Mark is going to go into, will point to Liverpool being the side that should win this game. But if I was a Spurs fan, I would believe very firmly that I was going to win this. And you'll probably win it in some weird way. It'll be the way that Chelsea did against Bayern. You'll get one shot on goal. It'll be in the 89th minute and you'll score, and then you'll win it on penalties or something weird like that.
I mean, I take that. That's fine. That's not a problem. You've gone on about the destiny. The actual facts, Mark, obviously do point to Liverpool, a Liverpool side who finished 26 points above Spurs in the Premier League. They scored 22 more goals. They conceded 17 fewer goals. They beat Spurs twice in the Premier League. So obviously Liverpool are rightly favourites for this game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the evidence suggests they're a fair price, as well as a smidgen of odds on favourites here. I think they've only lost 1 in 14 against Spurs as well, so the head-to-head is in their favour. As you say, the domestic league table, if you look at the advanced performance data from the Premier League this season as well, all points towards Liverpool too. And I'd also argue that the route to Madrid, as well as Brodders has pointed out there as well, it favours Liverpool. But not just that, it's also Champions League final trends. Now, I know we've got 2 teams from the same country competing against here, which actually makes it easier from a betting perspective, because we don't have to try and weight certain leagues against each other, certain countries and teams, etc. We see these teams inside out every week. We know what they're all about. We've got plenty of data and evidence to support our views. But I thought it was quite interesting, since 2001, only one team has won in 90 minutes who've been essentially underdogs or lower rated, really, on the European ranking system. The other 2 underdog victories came by penalty shootouts. And this Liverpool team are one of the greatest teams we'll probably ever see in the Premier League without actually winning the title. I think there's a burning desire around Liverpool and wanting to achieve something this season after what happened in the Premier League. I've been so impressed by their character, their focus, their relentlessness, really, to rise to every occasion every 3 or 4 days, especially with key players absent. Some of these matches as well against Barcelona, for example. I think they're comfortable. I think they're aware of the favouritism tag as well. I think they feel this is their home in the final of a European competition. But not just that, also, you look at their record under Klopp against the Big Six domestically. He's only lost 7 of 45 games against the Big Six, which is clearly quite impressive. There's very few weaknesses, I think, in this team. But one I would like to point out, really, is the fact that Klopp's clearly irked by the 3-week layoff coming into this game. He's so much so that, in Marbella, in their recent training camp, he was scrabbling around trying to find any opposition at all to play a friendly against last weekend, just to give his team 90 minutes in the legs to keep that intensity up. Because most teams are already on holiday, he had to settle for a Benfica B team, which featured under 23s and reserves, a bit of a mixed match team, really, and they weren't even able to play 45 minutes of regular time each way. So he's irked by that, and there's a suggestion that Liverpool are a little bit undercooked when they've had a long layoff, after international or whatnot too. So, if there's an opportunity for Spurs, it could be the fact that Liverpool might not be, going hell for leather from the first whistle.
Okay. The prices obviously show that Liverpool are the favourites. As you said, they're just under, they're just odds on at 1.97 to win in 90 minutes. You can get Spurs at around 4.45, the draw at 3.66. That's all in 90 minutes. To lift the cup, Spurs currently around 2.87, Liverpool 1.49. So that does give you an idea of the level of favouritism for the Merseysiders. Of course, they do have experience as well on their side, having been in last season's final as well. Spurs making their debut in the Champions League final. The last 5 sides making their debuts in a Champions League final have all lost. We talk a lot about experience in football. Paolo, do you think the experience of a Champions League final last season will help or indeed hinder Liverpool on Saturday evening?
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, because I feel like experience is one of those things that we all agree is important, right up until the hockey teenager shows up and proves to everyone, like it's one of those things in football that we can glorify sometimes, and it's important. But I think that that analogy is important, because experience can be a defining factor unless the people who have the experience just don't let it. And it's like Ajax this season. Did Ajax have experience of going and beating Madrid at the Bernabeu, of beating Juventus at the Allianz Stadium? No, but they had enough confidence in themselves and swagger to go in and do it. And so it's up to Tottenham whether or not they have that in them, whether or not Pochettino can instill that in them. Experience can cut both ways. Juventus are a good example. Juventus have been to a lot of European finals and they don't win them. So experience can cut in all different directions. I certainly think Liverpool will feel very comfortable on this stage. I think that's it's not an irrelevant point. I think it definitely means something. I think the fact that he did it just last season will give them a certain amount of that confidence. But Tottenham have approached their big games this season without any sense of being overawed, without any sense of being incapable of taking on these situations. So I'm hesitant to say that experience specifically is a reason why I wouldn't think that Tottenham could win this game.
Of course, it's the first time since 2010 that both finalists didn't win their group. We mentioned, obviously, that Spurs were in a pretty bad position after 3 games with just 1 point, but they managed to make it out of the group in that dramatic finale, as Brodders alluded to, and then have been sort of steadily gaining momentum, if you like. Liverpool as well have been brilliant in the knockout stages. In terms of that intense way that Liverpool start matches, and we've seen them start games and really kind of blow teams away in the first 20-30 minutes, that could be a problem for Spurs, who concede a lot of early goals. They've conceded 17 goals in the competition. 7 of those have come in the first 15 minutes. So you can get Liverpool to make a fast start and be ahead at 30 minutes at 3.6, which could be an interesting option given how quickly they start and how many early goals Spurs have been conceding. But Brodders, I know you wanted to tell me why there was an argument for backing the second half to be the highest scoring half in this game, despite what I just said about early goals.
I'd also, just on the point about experience, I think also you need to bear in mind, I think Paolo made some excellent points, but I think one thing you also need to consider is a lot of this Liverpool squad are carrying some baggage from last season, and losing that final in the way that they did can have a negative effect on them as well coming into this situation. So if something goes against them in the final, then emotionally and psychologically they might have some scars that get reopened. So, but to your point, I mean, in regards to the way the game might play out, I think Mark's already touched on the fact that these teams have had a significant break since the end of the Premier League season. I think if you look at the final last night, and I'm very happy to talk about the final last night in detail, the first half was very, very quiet. I think both teams struggled with their rhythm. They struggled with their passing, Chelsea especially. And I thought that the standard of play in the first half was not the level of the clubs can hit. And I think part of that was this lack of match sharpness and the fact that teams, the players have had this period of rest. So I think there's a good chance that in the final on Saturday, although Liverpool are known to try and start quickly, I think there will also be that lack of match sharpness, and it will take a little bit of time for the teams to settle in. I think also if you look at the history of games between these teams, they have been close in recent times. And again, back to your hopes that Spurs are going to be competitive in this final. I think they've lost narrowly to Liverpool twice in the league this season. The winner from the first of those games came in the 90th minute for Liverpool. It was slightly more, Spurs got one back in the 90th minute last time. But we've already touched on the fact that Spurs are scoring an awful lot of late goals in this competition. And I think the way that the final is set up tactically, it means that more often than not, the second half is the point at which games open up and you're going to see more goals because teams, they have to chase the game, or they have to score goals to either, bring themselves back into it, or in Liverpool's case, if they're leading, for example, 1-0 at half time and Spurs have to attack them, that's the perfect tactical scenario for Liverpool, to hit them on the counter and to use the pace of Salah and Mane. And, the well-documented strengths of Liverpool are all about their ability to hit sides with their pace. So for me, I think getting over, odds against on the second half being the one with more goals is a very fair bet.
Certainly is. Forgive me. I was just checking the price there for the second half to be the top scoring half, and you can get it at around about 2.12, which, as you said, sounds like a pretty decent bet. Despite what I said about those early goals, it could be a little bit more cagey. You do feel, though, Mark, that there are going to be goals in this game. I was looking, and both teams to score is at 1.78, which, just off the top of my head, without doing any research, seemed like a good bet. It seemed like a pretty fair price as well. I was expecting it to be a little bit lower, but 1.78 seems almost, if not generous, but certainly quite appealing. Spurs have scored in 21 of their last 22 Champions League games. Liverpool, though, surprisingly, they failed to score in half of the games that they played away from Anfield in the Champions League this season. Obviously, they should have scored at the Camp Nou, and we do expect them to score on Saturday night, right? So both teams to score could be a decent angle as well.
Yeah, I do think goals are certainly an angle to take in this game. Just looking at Spurs, really, I think there's a conundrum really about how they approach this game. I think we know what Liverpool are going to do, the simple 4-3-3. We know the personnel. But with Spurs, Pochettino does have the tendency to mix and match, really, depending on the opponents. And if you look back to the two league meetings, which Brodders referenced, they started with a four-man defence in the first game at Wembley. They're pretty much overawed in that game, considered 10 shots on. And I think they were even Pochettino admitted after the game they were deservedly defeated in that game. But he was really gutted after the March game. I think the winner came by an own goal, really. But in both of those games, he started with a back five in the second game at Anfield. Both of those games, Pochettino's made sort of tactical tweaks and changes within the game to help Spurs, really. And I think that's the beauty about this team. They've got the ability to mix and match. I do think they'll probably go with a back five for this game, just to combat Liverpool's strengths out wide as well. But I also think there's opportunity there for them if they wanted to get their attacking players on the pitch. Obviously, is Harry Kane going to play? I expect him to do so. But you want Son to be involved. And if Son's playing from the left, there's a real opportunity then to get in behind Trent Alexander-Arnold when he's bombing forward, or even on the right with Mo Salah. Both those two players can attack Robertson and Arnold. When the ball is turned over, possession for Spurs should be rapid. Should get out wide as quick as they possibly can. It's quite unfair, really, but Lucas Moura might not even be in the team if Harry Kane is starting. So I do think Spurs have plenty of threats and plenty of areas where they can hurt Liverpool too. Goals, contrary to what many cup finals you might think or might expect, low-scoring ties. The Champions League has been anything but in recent years. The last 8 have seen BTTS bank. 12 of the last 14 have seen both teams score in the Champions League final as well. 21 of the last 23 finals have seen at least 2 goals. 6 of the last 8 have gone over 2.5. I think we've only had 1 0-0 draw since 1991. When this competition was the European Cup. So Spurs-Liverpool is the highest scoring Premier League game in history. 8 of the last 10 have gone BTTS when they've played each other. 11 of the last 15 have seen over 2.5 goals as well. And it's also quite interesting that the Premier League and the Champions League are in the midst of their highest scoring seasons. Really, the last 4 highest scoring campaigns and both competitions have come in the last 5 years too. So clearly there's a penchant really for goals in these big games now. And I certainly want to be with both teams to score and over 2.5 goals. I think they're both very attractively priced. And
if you combine those two selections, you can get BTTS and over 2.5 goals at 2.35, which looks like a really good bet, actually. I hadn't checked the price for those two selections combined, but yeah, 2.35 for both teams to score and at least 3 goals. And given the history of this fixture, as you said, given both sides' scoring record, it does feel like there are going to be plenty of goals. By the way, usually on the podcast, the markets and the selections that we pick out, it's either in the to win market or the goals market, usually looking at Asian handicaps. However, for this game on Matchbook, we've got an absolute myriad of markets, many more markets than we usually have. So go and check that out, because it's not just the Asians or the goal lines or the to win as well, because we've got loads of stuff. Paolo, I know the guys from a betting perspective are erring towards backing Liverpool and certainly backing goals as well. If you had to put money on this, would you be with Liverpool?
Well, funnily enough, I do have a little bit of money on the outcome from placed after I believe I placed it after the first leg against Ajax for Tottenham. I just sort of thought there's too much feeling against them at the moment, and I just had a hunch they could, again, that thing of destiny. To be honest with you, it was less a well calculated decision than a sense of just I think things are happening for this team. I think the wild card that we haven't really spoken about much here yet is just this pause. It's such a long break between the end of the Premier League season and now. And I think that the first half of the Europa League final was instructive, because I thought there was some incredibly poor football played between Arsenal and Chelsea in the first half of that game. And look, there are teams that were playing disappointing football towards the end of the season anyway, but I just really thought you saw the rust quite visibly. And I think that perhaps in some ways it's good for both Tottenham and Liverpool. They're both playing a team from the same division, because if it was a team that had just finished last week, I think it might be a significant point in favour of the team that had finished last week. On top of that, you've got the question of what state is Harry Kane in. I was looking actually at his last couple of injuries, and funnily enough, he's got a pretty good record of coming back from injuries with the goal. If you look, the last few times he's missed games, he comes back and scores immediately in his first game back. So that isn't necessarily as big a factor as I imagined it might be. I thought it could be he could be the sort of striker that would need a bit of time to get up to speed, and the evidence doesn't support that. I think it's fascinating tactically what changes with Kane back, because if you look at the second leg against Manchester City, for instance, I don't know if Tottenham get through that game with Harry Kane. I think the fact that Son is up front and stretches things with his pace so much more and in a different way to what Kane would do for you is really significant in that game. So that's not a knock on Kane. Kane's a phenomenal striker who scores a ton of goals, but it does change your mode of playing, and perhaps gives us overall, between these two sides that both are capable of playing with such pace, a slightly different shape to the game. Because I think if it wasn't Kane and it was Son, then you'd get a much sort of more stretched game perhaps. But in the end, I still come back to the obvious thing, which is just, look, Liverpool finished in the same league, 26 points ahead. That's very hard to look past. These are teams that have been tested against the same competition all season, and Liverpool did significantly better. I think Liverpool's season has been utterly extraordinary. So for me, that they are the favourites, even though my bet is on Tottenham. But I guess the one sort of counterpoint to that there's just been sort of in the back of my mind, and maybe is relevant again. You sort of saw something of it, I felt like, last night again, to reference the Europa League final. There's one team here that sort of has had the most incredible season, like the most absolutely brilliant season, possibly in terms of the football played in their history. I don't know. I mean, Liverpool was incredible this season, and for them to walk away from that without something would be more painful, I think, than it would be for Tottenham, who didn't really expect to be in this final, who've had a good season, but not like I don't think they've necessarily been as good this season as they have been in some recent past seasons. And in that context, if something early, or even, if the first goal goes against them, I guess is what I'm thinking, does it start to eat Liverpool more than it would for Tottenham? Like, I feel like if Tottenham go a goal down, well, look what they've done all tournament. They've gone behind over and over and over again and found ways back. And look, Liverpool did too. Liverpool did it against Barcelona. But I just think in this final, with it so close, after a season in which you won and won and won, I mean, the winning run that Liverpool have been on to the end of the Premier League season, which didn't yield a trophy, if it starts to go against you, does that perhaps just have a little psychological impact that it wouldn't have on Tottenham? So that's I guess the wild card element that I think could tip it in Tottenham's favour.
Interesting. Yes, absolutely. When it is so close and when it is a final, these little mental aspects can play a key part. Before we go, I know, Brodders, you wanted to talk about the anytime goal scorer market. We've got loads and loads of options, obviously, in the anytime goal scorer market. Sadio Mane scored in last season's final for Liverpool against Real Madrid. He could become the first player since Franz Roth for Bayern Munich in 1975-1976 to score in 2 consecutive Champions League final. He's actually the shortest priced player to score at 2.8. Brodders, you are more interested in another Liverpool player, though?
Yes, sorry. Yes, Mo Salah. I think if you just purely from a sort of price play, if you look at Mo Salah's scoring record, I think, interestingly, in the Champions League this season, actually, the goals have been shared out a fair bit by Liverpool. The top scorer has only got 4 goals, which is Firmino, Mane and Salah. All have got 4 goals. But in the league, which I think is probably a better point of reference than the Champions League, because, of course, you've got two two English sides. Salah has again had a fantastic goal scoring season, although not hitting the heights of last year. He's got 22 goals, exactly the same as Mane, in roughly the same number of games. But I think, as a player, you look at his record against Spurs and it's strong. And I just think if you're getting nearly 2-1 on him to score any time, I think that's a value play, especially as it's a game I think will have goals in it. And he's a player who, has the ability to really sort of produce a moment of magic. So, I think with Firmino likely to play, I think all the sort of news that we're getting would suggest that he will be starting at least. I think Salah plays very well off Firmino, and I think it's just a very solid price to look at. I think Mane, you could make the same argument, but why would you take a shorter price on Mane than Salah when they've got virtually identical records? And also Mane, I'm not quite so convinced about Mane's temperament when it comes to the big occasion. I know, he's a fabulous player, obviously, but he's just got that sort of edge about him where he can lose his head, and he's got a bit of temperament about him, which I don't think Salah has. And of course, you've got the penalties, and depending on whether or not Milner plays, but if Milner doesn't start and Liverpool get a penalty, then I expect Salah would probably take that. So yeah, I think at nearly 2-1, it's a very fair price. So.
Okay, Salah and Mane currently both actually at 2.8. Firmino at 3.6 for Spurs. Harry Kane to score is at 3.0, and as Paolo mentioned, he does have a good scoring record coming back after injury. What about Son Heung-min as well at 4.2 to score, the hero for Spurs on a number of occasions this season? That could be an interesting bet as well. Right, I think we're going to leave it there. Just to recap what I think our tips are, we've got both teams to score on over 2.5 goals, which looks pretty tasty. Mo Salah to score at any time, and the second half to be the top scoring half. The guys possibly like Liverpool to win in 90 minutes as well. Logic would dictate it does make sense, but Spurs have shown that they never give up in this competition this season. So let's see what happens on Saturday evening. As I said, we're going to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us, guys, and thank you very much for listening and watching the podcast over the course of the season. We have had plenty of winners. It's been an extremely profitable season for followers of our tips. So hope you've enjoyed those winners. We'll be back next season, of course, with hopefully more winners and definitely more podcasts. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to the Matchbook Betting Podcast, because there are still lots of betting podcasts to come your way throughout the summer, and we'll be back next season. So subscribe to the Matchbook Betting Podcast on your preferred podcasting app.